Fairmont Crest did not calm down after the funeral. The air there was as stifling as the disinfectant scent still clinging to the funeral home, and Donnell stepped into it with shoulders heavy as stone. Years of studying abroad, collecting degrees, the quiet hope of coming home to make his father proud. All of it turned into a faded reel the instant he watched the coffin lid descend. The first shock was not tears but a grotesque silence that swallowed every sound. He tried to keep his balance amid condolences and pats on the back, but his hands trembled in tiny, traitorous shivers as if clutching at emptiness. The brilliant physician who had been his father was gone, leaving a cold hollow in Donnell's chest and a swarm of unanswered questions. An accident, they said, tidy, brief, packaged in forms and signatures. But what kind of accident came with off-key details? Coincidences so neat they rankled? Last-minute schedule changes? Grainy camera footage in a parking lot? And unknown numbers surfacing in Doug's call history right before everything ended? Donnell carried his grief down the hallways of memory, seeing his father everywhere. Teaching him to fix a radio, to read lab reports, to put his hands into the real world without losing faith in people. And it was precisely that memory of trust that now turned into a mute indictment. If it was truly an accident, why were the traces so tangled? If it wasn't, who had reason to push a devoted man off the narrow edge between life and death that as Donnell shifted from a hunched, numb stupor to a posture that stood up and claimed responsibility, Vanessa was quietly turning her sorrow into armor. She knew her son was lost in a maze of guilt and rage, knew every question he tried to smother would come back in dreams as warped images, knew the only piece left was the truth, however merciless. Vanessa looked at her husband's portrait as if it were a cracked mirror. Each shard reflected a severed piece of their life, too many blanks that kindness could not mend. She feared that Donnell's blind anger would push him too far, but a larger fear loomed, that the truth itself might break the family again. She laced her fingers so tightly they burned, then released them one by one, a private ritual teaching herself not to collapse. She needed information, a list of everyone who saw Doug on his last day, a reconstruction of timelines, a view into the financial currents running beneath seemingly innocent donations, the names of relationships Doug had shielded out of decency. Above all, she needed to keep Donnell inside a circle of control before he made himself the next casualty of hatred's machinery. The puzzle pieces slowly rotated toward one name, a door behind burnished stories, an address lit in neon and straddling the vague border between lawful diversion and power shortcuts. Joey's Casino. Donnell looked at the building as if it were a living creature. It breathed in the crowd's heat, swallowed secrets in exchange for stacks of chips, and somewhere behind tinted glass lay the answer he craved, or the trap that would snap shut on what was still good in him. He reminded himself of Doug, of the calm smile, of the injunction to know what you want before you enter the operating room. What did he want now, honestly? Justice, truth, someone real to hold responsible. But beneath the handsome vocabulary, he heard the dark apparatus of himself knocking. Wanting someone to pay, wanting a splash of blood to quiet the scream in his head. That punishing part made him ashamed, and the more he tried to deny it, the more it prowled, a wound left unbandaged. He knew he was entering a realm of temptation, and knew that a single wrong gesture could tint his life forever with an irreversible decision. Vanessa moved along a different orbit, less noisy but no less fierce. She gathered scraps from the last day, pulled the duty logs, opened neglected messages, connected dots between the hospital and rarely accepted after-hours appointments, and flagged irregular reports from the charitable account that Doug had worried over. She saw small fluctuations like black ants scattered across a surface that had looked clean, and each tiny, placed alongside another, arced into a dangerous curve pointing to the same center. She understood that Joey was the kind of man who would wash his hands with whiskey if he could instead of water, which meant there would always be the smell of money and conflict around him. Understanding did not equal evidence, and evidence often lived in moments when people let their guard slip. Vanessa measured the distance between the truth and her child's safety and found it thin as a thread. That night, Fairmont Crest lowered its curtain earlier than usual. Donnell went to the casino not as a patron but as a collector of invisible debts. He carried every suffocating hour since the funeral, every unanswered call, every midnight jolt at the sound of a passing ambulance. The slot machines murmured like metallic rain. The card tables formed islands in a sea of bodies, and at the center sat Joey's frosted glass office where a silhouette leaned into a jaundiced light. Donnell entered that world without blinking. He believed that if he looked long enough, the ugly thing would show its face. But when the door closed behind him, he realized he had just carried his life into a place without law except the owner's. Still he advanced, propelled by rage, duty, the promise he had made to himself that Doug would not be reduced to a statistic. What happened next was not movie loud. It broke apart, fragmentary, a string of snapshots taken by a trembling hand. Office lights skimmed a polished wooden desk, clenched questions traded for cold stares. A few steps too close triggering reflexive defense, a shove quicker than thought, a heavy object skittering off the desk edge, then a brutal impact that made time contract. No swelling music, only a thick sound of weight meeting bone, followed by a flood of silence. Joey did not scream, did not have time to turn into attacker or bargainer. He simply toppled like concrete robbed of rebar. His eyes stalled midway to comprehension, a tendril of blood spreading on the floor like a map nobody wanted. Donnell froze, chest heaving without air, his brain screeching a refusal to process the image before him. He tried counting breaths the way he'd learned to steady himself, but every breath dragged in the copper tang that turned his stomach. His fingers opened and closed, desperate for a moral handhold in a room of glass and wood. The justice he had burned for a moment ago turned into a stone dropping straight through him. He could not tell who shoved first, who grabbed first, who knocked the object down, who lost control. He only knew the result lay on the floor, cold and still. Vanessa arrived too late to see anything but the blood gone past movement. She stood on the threshold for a stretch that felt infinite, then forced herself inside, one hand reflexively clamped over her chest as if to keep her heart from falling out. In the shadowed corner, Donnell was curled like a lost child, his eyes stripped of all anger and raw with shock. She looked at her son and then at the body, and all the logic in her skull flared at once like an overloaded circuit. Two truths occupied the room. One person was dead, one person was living. She would not permit her mind to panic. She knelt, searching for any residual warmth, but the truth was still cold, absolute. She sat beside Donnell, neither embracing him nor touching the corpse, as though a single wrong move would bring down the fragile balance. In that minute, motherhood and reason tore at each other inside her. She wanted to call an ambulance and the police that second, to say everything, to let the system do its part. She could also see Donnell being ground to paste under the gears of suspicion, saw how the story would be retold in words stacked against him, saw how the public eye had no patience for the complications of tragedy. Hard choices do not knock politely. They slam down like weather, forcing a decision before the scales are set. Vanessa ran through every scenario. Call the police at once and let Donnell recount each detail in a state of panic. Buy a few minutes to straighten the scene and then still face the law in a different shape. Or pull her son out of there and accept that she would be trading away both sleep and reputation for the rest of their lives. She feared becoming the kind of person Doug would disappoint, but she feared losing the last of her family even more, all because a tragedy had started with the murk around his death. She asked herself where the border lay between protection and complicity, between love and excuse. No absolute answer existed, only layers of gray stacking atop one another. Donnell stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. They could save a life, point away, or push a body across the line between living and dead. He heard his father's voice in his head. Not the actual voice, but the moral discipline Doug had planted. Did he have a right to hold back anything? Did the truth measure intention or only outcomes? His intention had been to find answers, not create a death. But here was the outcome. Guilt threaded through muscle, slid down his spine, soaked into bone. He thought of confession, of handcuffs, of long prison corridors, of Vanessa alone in a house that had lost two men at once. The fear made him retch. He knew that whichever path he chose, he had already lost an older version of himself. The rest of his life would be split in two, before and after this instant. Beyond the glass, the casino kept running as if a world had not just collapsed a few steps away. Chips still shuffled. Laughter popped. People won and lost in their ritual flight from personal emptiness. Time no longer ran straight for Vanessa. It coiled and buckled, and she had to be the one to pull the cord. She did the only thing she knew for sure: control what could be controlled. Her eyes swept the room, imprinting each object's place, marking the spatter arcs, inferring the blow's direction, clocking the cameras, calculating blind angles, checking Donnell's phone, scrubbing only the excess that would let the clock itself become an instant accuser. She was not erasing truth. She was dragging them back from a line where truth would be deformed by panic and prejudice. She knew she would speak to a lawyer, to the few she still trusted, and she knew they would have to go to the authorities. But not in this raw, incoherent shape that in Vanessa's mind. Doug appeared not to scold but to serve as a silent yardstick. He had lived to reduce the pain of others, and the cruel paradox was that his death had opened a vein of pain for those left behind. If there was anything she was sure of, it was that Doug would not want another meaningless death. She looked at Joey one last time without personal hatred, only the froideur of a mother shielding a child who had slipped off the brink. She laid a hand on Donnell's shoulder, not to soothe him, but to pull him into the present. They had no time for hesitation. Every second scored a new fracture across the safety glass. Leaving that room, Donnell felt as if he were stepping out of his own body. Every sound was magnified, every light stabbed like needles. Every stranger's face seemed to know. He walked close to Vanessa, relearning how to breathe to her rhythm, holding on to the calm cadence she set like a rope cinched around him. The first blaze of rage had sunk, and behind it rolled a tide of guilt with no shore. He knew he would return to this truth, would recount it, explain it, own it, but at that moment he needed not to drown. Their footprints pressed into the thick carpet and vanished, as if the casino could swallow any trace if paid enough. The night did not end in the parking lot. It stretched across a kitchen with the lights off and a cold teapot, into a living room littered with papers that suddenly each looked like kindling, into a bedroom where neither dared lie down for fear the moment behind the glass would replay the instant their eyes closed. Vanessa opened a notebook and mapped timelines as if charting survival. She listed options, projected consequences, named people she could call, and the rules she absolutely would not break. Do not lash their own backs with heavy words yet. Do not crown anyone hero or villain yet. Do not let outsiders impose a story before they can speak. She made Donnell drink water, refused to let him hide in silence. She recounted what she had seen and made him do the same, not to assign guilt but to keep the truth from being sanded away by nightmares. Morning rose like an insult. Light made everything look harmless, but their insides knew that peace was counterfeit. The news carried nothing about a body in a casino, which felt like a temporary mercy and a delayed storm warning. Vanessa called a lawyer Doug had trusted, someone who understood the difference between self-defense and senseless violence, between a brawl and intent. She did not beg for absolution. She needed a legal frame wide enough for truth to stand upright. Donnell sat across from the window, watching his reflection as if it were a stranger. The hard truth revealed itself. Love was not a cloak of concealment. It was rough cloth that scraped the skin but kept a person from falling away. Vanessa offered him no consolation through illusions. She forced him to stand and claim his part, because that alone might save him from vanishing into a black hole that in the pocket of time between waiting and action, Donnell allowed himself to cry. Not a storming wail, but a briny leak at the edges, a confession that he had crossed a threshold forever. He understood why Vanessa would not let them run, why she kept everything within a frame even as her heart cracked. She was teaching him Doug's last lesson at the highest price. Justice does not spring from anger. It comes when a person can face complexity without blinking. He thought of the moment in the frosted office, the shove, the weight, the blood. He wanted to rewind seconds, ask a different question, step back. Time has no rewind. All that remained was how he would tell it, how he would bear it, and how he would prevent one death from summoning others. Vanessa watched her son and saw the war inside him shift from a blaze to a steady, smoldering endurance. She knew the road ahead would be steep. Interrogation rooms, prosecutors, defense counsel, reporters, old friends showing new faces. She also knew that at some point the truth around Doug's death would flick up like another blade, perhaps slicing away a few doubts, perhaps drawing more blood. She chose to believe the single thing left to her, that if they had to take the hits, they would do it without lying to themselves. She closed her notebook, inhaled, and placed the call that would bend the family's path again. The ringtone chimed with a calm absurd beside what had happened, and in the quiet between each ring she heard her heart still beating, irregular but unbroken from a distance. Fairmont Crest looked postcard green, the kind of view sold at a souvenir stand, but those living inside knew that pretty scenes do not rinse away the smell of storms. Donnell let his hands fall and stopped dodging his own reflection. He was ready to answer when asked, to name what he had done and had not done, to accept that true justice might clash with the itch for immediate fairness. He did not forgive himself, but he would not throw himself into the fire to please anyone either. He chose to stand upright. It was the only way to meet Doug in dreams without lowering his eyes. And Vanessa, walking the road of turning grief into a rule of action, repeated her quiet oath. Love will be armor, and armor can dent. What matters is whether the wearer keeps the spine. When the door opened to admit the first emissaries of the system and the truth was hauled into trial by flame, mother and son stood side by side, not as innocents or culprits, but as people prepared to bear responsibility on the ground they loved, for the man they lost, and for the versions of themselves that, at the end of all this, still needed a chance to live unbowed.